Hello, everybody. I'm Madame Sensei. I teach Spanish, French, Japanese. I teach health over the summer, and for the last 2 years, I've had a junior English class. And I have been talking about how I feel like a first-year teacher with this English class. Nothing that I do seems to work. The students just aren't engaged, having struggle getting them invested in anything that we do, and none of my bag of tricks is working. Last year, one of my students submitted this. Now, junior English is all about the American dream, and he submitted this very, very bland 5-paragraph essay that was obviously a generative AI word salad. And the student left school shortly thereafter, and so I pretended like somebody else had turned this in, but it was one of my students. And I decided I was going to go ahead and read it to my students, hiding the fact that it was one of my students, just because I wanted them to see why generative AI is so boring. Okay, and so I read it aloud to them, and one of the students asked, Did you put this through a generative AI checker? She's a ChatGPT checker, she said. And I was like, what? Do I have to? I mean, look at this. Do I have to? And so I said, oh my gosh, I have to explicitly teach my students to be able to tell the difference between something that has been generated by a computer and something that has been generated by a human. And I will talk about that in a later episode. But today I'm talking about my frustrations with our giant essays. So we've been working on The Great Gatsby. And last year, Gatsby was the only book that my students were interested in reading. When we got to it, and by the time we got to it, it was the end of the year. The students were like, oh, yay, I've heard about this, and I was curious. And I was like, huzzah, I finally have them. It's May, and I finally have them. But just the way that things had been laid out, and again, I'm the junior, even though I'm so much older than everyone, I'm the junior English teacher because everybody else has been teaching English for 15, 20 years, and I've just been teaching English for the last 2 years. So I just kind of went along like, oh, what do you want me to do? All right, I will do that. And so that was the order that they decided on. So I was very frustrated, and I sure hope my colleagues don't see this, but I was very frustrated in many of our essays last year because a lot of the essays just kind of felt like they were really shoehorned in. For example, the Gatsby essay had to be all about corruption in The Great Gatsby. And I'm like, corruption? Okay, he's a bootlegger. Corruption? Sure, okay, we can do that. You don't want to do it on unrequited love? You don't want to do it on the decline of the American dream? You don't want to do it on what your personal illusion, your personal fantasy versus reality? No, you don't want to focus on the fact that we have an unreliable narrator who's not the protagonist. I mean, there's all these other interesting things going on in Gatsby. You want to do corruption? Okay, I'm the junior member of the English team. All right, we'll do that. So this was last year's essay. The students had to choose a focus of corruption. Was it going to be abuse of power, entrusted power, or private gain? And this is the kind of checklist I made for them so that they could help think about how they were going to focus things. The reason for this corruption, and we went over all this. We went over what is moral disengagement, what is rational choice theory, personality traits, social learning theory, situational environmental factors. Really? The Great Gatsby? Okay, sure. And I bit my tongue and I walked my students through this essay. I chose the following 3 cases to focus on. They had to draw it back to things going on in the world right now. Okay, so we read a lot of nonfiction articles and stuff so that they could have things to draw from. and politics, of course, being crazy. It was kind of a landmine and stuff. But at any rate, I wasn't happy with the writing that the students did on this, and I wasn't happy with the focus that we pushed everyone into. So this year in August, before school began, I went to my colleague and really hat in hand. And I said to him, first of all, I was like, okay, Gatsby, that was the one thing my students were interested in last year. They didn't care about the Crucible. They didn't care about Raisin in the Sun. Gatsby was the one thing they were looking forward to. And because we saved it for the end of the year, I don't really feel like I did it justice. We didn't get really deep into it. Can we move it forward? And he looked at me like he was kind of apologetic and embarrassed. He looked at me like he was embarrassed, and he was like, well, actually, I was thinking of making my students, instead of doing an essay, have them do a graphic novel for Gatsby. They could illustrate one panel per chapter and choose a quote from the chapter, and I think that would get them interacting with the text better. He was so apologetic about this. I did a little happy dance. I jumped up and I was like, "Oh, thank goodness. Huzzah! This is my wheelhouse. This is what I excel at." Okay? Now you need to know I do not draw, okay? I never learned how to draw. But I did learn how to translate, because all I ever wanted to do in life was read more comic books and watch more cartoons. And that is why I became a professional translator. So, yes, I have an internet movie database page. It's wrong, but I was a professional translator for many years, like over 150 movies and TV shows that I have worked on. I love comic books. So I'm like, hold my beer, except I don't drink beer. Hold my beer. I'm going to run home and go get the Bible. Oh, well, hold on a second. First of all, our objective was create a 9-scene graphic novel that visually represents the key events and themes from each chapter of The Great Gatsby. This project will help you synthesize the novel's plot, characters, and symbols in a creative way. Okay, so then I said, I'm going to run home and get Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. And my colleague had never heard of this. And I'm like, this is our Bible. This is how we literally analyze comic books. This is our go-to reference book, okay? So I went home and I took a bunch of screenshots. You see, I'm so afraid of bending my precious, precious book that my screenshots are really awful. But this is just such a masterful book. So I'm standing in front of my class and I'm like, this is where I excel. Finally, I'm not a first-year teacher. I am an expert on how words and images come together in the comic book. And I can explain this, and I can explain this forwards and backwards. And my class isn't listening to me. They totally are not listening to me. They're talking about their girlfriends, their party that they went to, the basketball game, the football game, track starting, whatever, the FFA events coming up. Those are all great things. I would love the students to be able to write about those things, but no, they won't write about them. They're just talking amongst each other while I am trying to get them excited about comic books. One thing that I'm very, very solid on as a teacher is that I want my students in anything I teach to understand I will never make them do something I'm not willing to do myself. So whenever I assign an essay, I'm standing in the front of the classroom at the board, writing the essay in front of them, writing my essay, whatever I chose, right in front of them so that they can pick apart what I'm writing and hopefully learn a bit about the craft of writing, right? Okay, so for this was no different. I made my Gatsby comic book right in front of them after I had kind of given up on explaining how comic books work. But so I'm doing my comic book in front of them, and no, I don't draw very well. This is tracing, okay, but I chose. Yeah, you don't care what I did, okay. So I'm doing my comic book in front of them so they can understand this is what we expect from you, to turn in, okay. Yeah, Gatsby is Sanji because that was the biggest simp I could think of. So the students, I gave them a week worth of class time. It's very difficult nowadays to give homework because we had administration for a long time that was very anti-homework. And I was like, it's very difficult to teach a language if the students aren't practicing at home. It's very difficult to teach piano if the students aren't practicing at home. It's very difficult to teach any progressive skill if the students aren't practicing at home. But fortunately, our new administration is a little better. But at any rate, it's difficult to get the kids to do anything at home right now. So I gave them class time, precious, precious, precious class time to work. And I told them, look, guys, I don't know how to draw. I did not spend my time learning how to draw. I'm not spending my time right now learning how to draw. So, stick figures are completely fine. I don't mind at all if you do stick figures. All I want you to do is show me that you understood what was going on in this chapter. Now, my colleague and I, when we were coming up with the rubric for this, he really wanted, and you might say, well, I thought you were one of several English teachers. Yeah, this year we got slammed with really, really giant classes so that, yeah, it's a big story. There's 2 of us teaching junior English this year. That's all you really need to know. He really wanted to grade them on their artwork. And I said, this is not an art class. I'm not an art teacher. I'm not going to grade them on their artwork. In my health class, when we have a big, like the final essay that the students have to write that synthesizes everything together, I'm not grading them on writing conventions. I'm not grading them on spelling. I'm grading them on, do you understand these health terminologies? Okay. My Japanese class, I have the students write something in English and then translate it into Japanese. I'm not grading them on whether or not their English was right. I'm grading them on their Japanese, right? I'm grading them on what they signed up for. So I don't want to grade my students on art, but he had a good argument that if he doesn't grade them on the art, they're not going to put much effort into it. So I wound up keeping the art off my rubric. I don't regret that, but I certainly see what he was going for. Okay, so here's some examples of what students turned in, okay? This is great, this is fine, okay? Here's another one. Yeah, here's another one. I don't know. Here's stick figures. Yay! I don't care. I like the stick figure Gatsby floating in the pool. That's fine. Stick figures are fine by me, okay? I can tell that you can visualize what's going on in the chapter. And I do have my English students drawing a lot because I have a first chapter Friday where I read to them from a book that I hope they'll get interested in. I go up to the librarian upstairs and she helps me choose things that are exciting, that have good hooks, And so I have, because I don't want my students like spacing out or trying to whisper to each other or whatever, I have them drawing what I'm reading so that they can visualize it better. A lot of the students are having a hard time visualizing books. Okay, this was a good one. Stick figures. Fine, good, okay. This girl didn't even know she could draw, and she decided she was inspired by the fact that I used Millhouse for Nick, I guess. I don't know, so she did she's like, I'm so proud of myself. I haven't drawn before, and I was like, this is very good. And of course, she did Daisy. And this is a student who loves to draw, and she got really into it. And my colleague said in his rubric, you have to add color. She goes into such detail in black and white. I'm like, that's fine. That you do not have to add color if you are not thinking in color. That is completely fine. So when all is said and done and looking back on this, first of all, not everybody turned it in yet, even though I gave them an entire week of class time to work on this. I have a lot of F's in my class right now. Will they turn it in eventually? I sure hope so. But the fact of the matter is they frittered away the class time. Like, they were not working. They were talking about the basketball game, the party they're going to, blah, 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 blah. Okay? Looking back on this as an assignment, I'm really frustrated because The whole reason I'm fluent in 4 languages, 4.5 languages, is because I love to read. I love to read so much. I love picking apart a story, dissecting it, saying why it's horrible, saying why it's great, saying what would make it better, comparing this character from here to this character from here. I adore that. It's the whole reason my husband and I got married, is because we both like to do this, and this is what we talk about all the darn time. Looking at what my students did here, choose a scene, write a quote, I don't really feel like we did that. When all is said and done, I'm looking at this, I didn't have that much fun with it. I don't think the students have that much fun with it. It feels like a book report. So I didn't feel like it got as in-depth as an essay would have. I know we're so afraid right now of ChatGPT that we don't want the students to write essays, but by golly, they've got to learn to write. That's critical thinking. They have to learn to organize their thoughts. I don't feel like their thoughts were very organized with this. It wasn't particularly demanding for the students, and it was really hard to get my students engaged to begin with. At one point on Thursday, after we'd been working on this for a week, one of my students said, "Hey, did we ever finish Gatsby?" And I'm like, I could have had a V8, smacking myself in the head. I read it aloud to you. I read it aloud to you mostly. Okay, there were times I had you read to yourself, but there were a lot of chapters that I read aloud to you. So for you to say, did we even finish it? Oh my gosh. Okay, so I don't know. I'm really struggling because, like I said, I feel so much like a first-year teacher. I just don't know how to get the kids excited about literature when I am so enthusiastic about it. And so, I mean, that's the reason I make these videos. I know nobody watches them. That's fine. This is for me to think aloud. This is part of my Hattie exercise of I'm reflecting on teaching, and I film my students. Actually, I don't put them in the YouTube videos and stuff, but I do all that after hours stuff about dissecting my own lesson and what went right and what went wrong. And I gotta think long and hard about this because I'm just not happy. I loved the escape room. The escape room worked fabulously. I don't know if I said that enough in my escape room video. The students were very engaged in the escape room. The principal came in and observed, and she thought it was wonderful. And the students I thought were really playing with the themes. I mean, some of it was goofy stuff. The green light was just a green light, but the fact that they now will remember the green light and they're talking about the green light, that's all well and good. So the escape room, I guess, fills the void for me for what I had wanted the students to do with this. But I'm surprised and disappointed that a graphic novel that, I mean, it seemed like the perfect marriage between what I can teach and what the students are capable of doing, and I feel like it kind of fizzled. So stay tuned if you want more of my experiments, the good and the bad. And please, if you have any better ideas, or you're listening to me talking and you say, oh, you know what, you missed this really obvious thing, please tell me, because I need your help. So I hope to see you on the next one.